The most important thing about the currency cloud is we address a real need. And that's the need of small and medium businesses and the companies that serve them to be much more efficient and more transparent and cheaper in paying their bills on a cross-border basis. Global trade grows exponentially. The number of firms that are involved in that trade grows exponentially as well. Yet the banking system that services that is still back in the, 20th century, 19th century, hasn't evolved. So the real reason that we're growing is that the market that we're serving, or the customers that we're serving, which is making B2B payments, is something that really needed disruption and really needed a new set of technologies and players to help them along. What investors are looking for in an early stage company like ourselves is a substantial in global demand. Currency Cloud addresses a real problem, a real market problem that is substantial in global, which is the requirement of businesses all over the world to make their payments. So when we talk about the payments industry and cross-border remittance, often the discussion is about personal remittance or migrant remittances or sending money to whether it's China or North Africa for individuals. The demand for businesses is even larger than that. And there are very few companies, and Currency Cloud is one, that address that business problem, which has a huge potential. So for the Currency Cloud, the US represents a substantial market with tremendously unmet demand. European customers are far more experienced actually in cross-border business historically. US customers less so, but the amount of global trade that comes out of the US is actually equivalent to that comes out of the UK. One of the major differences between operating in the US and operating in Europe is in Europe, if you're regulated in one country, then you are passported to all of the other countries. So if you operate in the UK, you can operate throughout Europe. The US, unfortunately, doesn't work like that. To operate in any one state, you need to be licensed in that state. So in our business, which is a regulated money transfer business, we need to be regulated by all 50 states. So when looking at the US, for us anyways, it's not one single market, it's 50 different markets, which will require 50 state regulations, often bonds and cash and investment in each of those places. So for us, it's not so simple as just opening up in the US. It requires a substantial amount of investment, a substantial amount of thought, and a substantial amount of capital, much more than it takes in Europe. And that's one of the real major things to think about for what we're doing in the US. It requires money and it requires planning. Our C round, the last round of capital that we just raised, was led by Sapphire, which is the investment arm of SAP. For us, that was incredibly important. And SAP, of course, as we all know, ERP company and way beyond that in terms of business software, was very, very important to us, to the kinds of investors that came into the company in the last round. As we're an enterprise company serving businesses, we really wanted to bring into the business and put onto the board someone who came from an environment that serviced businesses and not just servicing consumers. What happens, or what we get from bringing in Sapphire and SAP, which is represented by Andreas, who's joined the board, is a real connection to the SAP ecosystem. Of course, we have to work for it, we have to do it, but Andreas brings in and SAP bring in a real connection to the business-to-business world, and that was incredibly important to us in putting together our last round of investors. The Currency Cloud has substantial growth opportunities. It can grow in Europe tremendously, ultimately in the US, and then eventually we'll actually look at Asia. That will be the US in 2016. In 2016, we'll think about Asia and then try to implement that in 2017. So there's an opportunity for us to be very, very large and very, very substantial and very, very, very global. So what our plan is to be the premier foreign exchange or global payment infrastructure that spans the globe. That involves, in our case, being a 24/7, being a global company, being represented everywhere across the world. When we can do that and accomplish that, and we're working on the US this year and Asia the year after that, I think we have the potential to build a very substantial, very important, and very global business. As a startup, and we're a couple of years along, but we're still a startup compared to the larger companies in the world, there are a couple of things that are important. One, not just to talk to our own startup community. Often when we talk to other startups, we think the same way, we think about disruption. That's important, but more important is to talk to the banks and the institutions that are actually doing what we're doing now. In the end, with those large companies and their large experience in terms of delivering the kinds of service that we're trying to disrupt, and the startups themselves, bringing them together in one place allows a kind of cross-fertilization. We learn from them, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively. They learn from us, sometimes positively, sometimes negatively. But the combination of both together actually creates an environment where we all learn about how to service the customer a lot better.